with a dull thud. It was a dummy training grenade. Carter saw the metal pineapple hit the ground. A lifetime of hardwired military instinct, forged in the fires of discipline and survival, instantly overrode his desperate desire to play the nice guy. His brain registered the falling object, calculated the deadly potential if it had been live, and he snapped. The fragile shell of the sweet, understanding sergeant shattered into a million pieces, revealing the screaming, terrifying Marine underneath. "Oh, you knucklehead!" Carter roared, sprinting toward Gomer with terrifying speed, his voice echoing off the distant hills like rolling thunder. "Well, you numbskull, you lame brain, how could you pull such a boneheaded stunt?" Ampy gasped in horror, clutching her purse to her chest as she watched the monstrous transformation. Carter stood nose to nose with Gomer, his face completely purple, spit flying from his lips as he screamed. Of all the knucklehead things to do, what if that had been a live grenade? Gomer stood at rigid attention, his face a mask of profound sorrow and regret. He knew he had messed up. "Well, I am sorry, Sergeant Carter. I do not know how in the world I could have done a thing like that." "Well, I do," Carter bellowed, his voice cracking with fury. "It is because you are stupid. Stupid, stupid, stupid." Ampy could not take it anymore. She marched right onto the obstacle course, her sensible shoes kicking up dust, utterly fearless in the face of the raging Marine. "What is the matter?" she demanded, her voice cutting through Carter's tirade. "Why are you shouting like that? Do not tell me you are angry with this poor boy again." Carter froze. He looked at Ampy, then at Gomer, then at the dummy grenade on the ground. The reality of his situation crashed down upon him. He had lost his temper in front of the television star. His stripes were practically evaporating before his eyes. He swallowed hard, violently forcing a smile back onto his sweating, purple face. It looked more like a grimace of unbearable pain. "Oh, no, no," Carter stammered, his voice rising 3 octaves in a desperate attempt to sound friendly. "I am not angry. Not really angry." Gomer, ever the peacemaker, looked at Aunt B with complete sincerity. "But, Aunt B, he has got a right to be angry. I did a very wrong thing." Carter seized a lifeline Gomer threw him, nodding vigorously. "That is right. Pyle, you did. Naughty, naughty." He reached out and awkwardly patted Gomer's cheek. Gomer lowered his eyes. "Sorry, Sergeant Carter. I really am sorry." Carter patted Gomer on the shoulder, looking over at Aunt B with desperate, pleading expression. "Saudi, you are sorry? Oh, that is good. That is very good. I am talking to him real nice. Am I not, Miss Taylor? Nice and soft and kind." Ampy looked at the sweating, twitching, wildly unnatural man before her. She crossed her arms, deeply unimpressed. "Well, it is an improvement." "That is an improvement," Carter repeated eagerly, nodding his head rapidly. "Uh-huh." Ampy stepped closer, looking Carter right in the eye, seeing through the pathetic charade. "And this is the kind of sergeant you would like your friend Gomer-Pyle to have?" Carter stopped nodding. He looked at Aunt B, then he looked at Gomer. He looked at the dummy grenade lying in the dirt, a stark reminder of the deadly serious business of being a Marine. The artificial smile melted away from his face, replaced by a look of profound, solemn realization. He was a Marine. He trained men for combat. He could not compromise his duty, not for good television, not for anything. Carter squared his shoulders, standing tall and proud. He looked Ampy directly in the eye, his voice calm, steady, and unyielding. "As a matter of fact, I would." Ampy raised an eyebrow. "Uh-huh. Well, I cannot do it," Carter stated firmly, his deep voice resonating with absolute conviction. "I am not that kind of sergeant, and I never will be." Ampy opened her mouth to protest, but Carter turned away from her, fixing his terrifying gaze solely on Gomer-Pyle. "And Pyle," Carter barked, his voice returning to its glorious, deafening roar, "if you think I am going to drop this, you are nuts. I am going to have you down there digging ditches and doing push-ups until you are blue in the face. You got that?" Ampy gasped, reeling back from the sheer volume and ferocity of his voice. Well, I never... Oh, Gomer, you poor dear. She reached out to embrace her nephew, expecting to find him crushed by the brutal reprimand. Instead, Gomer stood tall, his eyes bright, his face radiating an absolute, unwavering calm. He gently placed his large hands on Aunt B.A.'s shoulders, looking at her with a maturity and understanding that she had never seen in him before. Really, Aunt B., Gomer said softly, his voice steady and resolute. There's a few things about Sergeant Carter and the Marines that you ought to know. That evening, the recreation room at Camp Henderson was packed tight. The air was thick with tension and the smell of stale popcorn. Dozens of Marines, clad in their off-duty T-shirts and trousers, were crowded around the small, glowing television set in the corner of the room. In the back of the room, sitting alone on a hard wooden chair, was Sergeant Carter. His arms were crossed over his chest, his face pale and drawn. He was watching the screen with the grim resignation of a condemned man waiting for the executioner to pull the lever. Corporal Boyle stood nervously by his side, shifting from foot to foot. The television screen glowed brightly, showing the polished, smiling face of Johnny Clark sitting behind a sleek studio desk. Well, we will have another interesting guest after this word from our sponsor. The television host announced smoothly, cutting to a commercial for laundry detergent. In the recreation room, a low murmur of anxious chatter broke out among the men. "Hey, Pyle," a Marine called out from the front row, looking over his shoulder. "Are you sure your Aunt B is going to be on television tonight?" Gomer, sitting happily in the second row with a large bowl of popcorn on his lap, nodded eagerly. "Well, she said she was. She called me from the hotel right before she left." "Hey, you guys cool it," Boyle hissed, glancing nervously at Carter. "Carter?" Carter just stared straight ahead, completely silent. His jaw clenched so tight it looked as though his teeth might shatter. "Well, has she been on yet?" Another Marine asked impatiently. "No, not yet," Gomer replied, offering his bowl around. Gomer looked back at Carter, noticing the older man's pale complexion and rigid posture. He stood up, carrying his wooden chair toward the back of the room. "Sergeant Carter, if you want to sit down, you can have my chair," Gomer offered kindly. Carter did not even look at him. "No, thanks. I will stand." The commercial ended, and the jaunty theme music of Johnny Clark at Large filled the small room. The Marines leaned forward, completely silent, their eyes glued to the flickering black and white screen. Our next guest is a lady I had on the radio program yesterday when we were interviewing out at Camp Henderson, Johnny Clark announced, turning to a second chair on the stage. She had some very interesting comments about her visits at the camp. I invited her down tonight to tell us a little more about them. The camera panned over. There, sitting proudly under the bright studio lights, looking elegant and composed, was Aunt B. How about a nice, warm welcome from Miss B. Taylor from Mayberry, North Carolina? Johnny smiled. The studio audience applauded politely. On the screen, Aunt B. offered a gracious, slightly nervous nod. In the recreation room, Carter closed his eyes and braced for the inevitable explosion. "Well, here we go, Sergeant," Boyle whispered grimly. "Yeah," Carter muttered, his voice hollow. "Ma Barker." On the television, Johnny Clark leaned forward, ready to stoke the fires of controversy. "Now, Miss Taylor, when we talk, look, I want to set the record straight." Carter muttered to the screen, unable to stop himself. "What I said and did was what I thought was right, and no civilian is going to make me change my mind. Yes, I did." "Quiet, Pyle," Carter snapped instantly, though Gomer had not said a word. "You cause enough trouble." Johnny Clark continued on the television, completely unaware of the drama unfolding in a dusty recreation room miles away. "Your complaints centered mainly around his sergeant, Sergeant Carter." "That is right." Amby agreed firmly, her voice steady and clear. "You said he was unfair and unreasonable." Johnny pressed, leaning in closer. "You remember telling me that?" "Yes, I remember." Amby said